Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. One of the things I hear sometimes are these hard and fast rules about what street photography is and what it isn't. There's a lot of concern about how the images are created or what the images are created with, to the point that a discussion of the actual photograph becomes laughably not even a point of discussion. It's more of a discussion about whether it's black and white or if it's color or if it was shot with a rangefinder as opposed to a DSLR. All of this stuff really doesn't make any difference to me. For me, ultimately, it's about the photograph. And one of the things that I often hear discussed is the choice of focal length. Now, I personally favor the use of a 24, 35, or 50 millimeter, but that's specific to me. It's not because I think that those are the only focal lengths that you should use for street photography. It's for me that I'm looking for a sense of intimacy, and I feel I get that when I move in as close as possible to my subject. But that doesn't mean that you can't use a telephoto lens. Now, I think what's important to consider is why you're choosing to use a telephoto focal length. Initially, a lot of people who start practicing street photography will tend to use longer focal lengths because they're intimidated about photographing strangers, photographing people that they don't know. So they seek the safety and the security of shooting people from a distance away. And I think that alone is not the reason why you should use a telephoto focal length. If the reason that you're using a telephoto focal length is because you don't want to risk confronting someone or having them aware of why you're photographing them, I think that's the wrong reason. Because what happens is that you are so preoccupied with whether or not that person is going to recognize you that you're not really paying attention to what's happening within the frame. You're just hoping you get the shot without anybody noticing. And as a result, you'll see a lot of photographs that appear like they're pretty good images that were shot with a telephoto lens, but they lack the impact and the punch that some other photographs possess, largely as a result of not the choice of the focal length, but how much attention the photographer was paying to everything else in the frame. So I chose three images that I think illustrate that point. All right, here we have a shot by Bob McClure. We don't have any XF data on this picture. Now, you take a look at this picture and it has the telltale signs of a telephoto focal length. One is the compression, which is how elements in the foreground and the background appear to be much closer to the subject than they actually are. That's one of the reasons people like using telephoto focal lengths for portraiture, for example. One of the other signs is how the foreground, the horse and its ears, and the background are really dramatically blurred. And that's another result of the telephoto focal length is the shallow depth of field. Now, depth of field is also going to be influenced by the choice of aperture and how close the camera is to your subject, but all of those three things in combination largely had an influence on the look of this picture. The strength of this photograph is not just the fact that it was shot with a telephoto focal length, though that optical nature of that lens obviously provides a really nice look in terms of the blurred background in the foreground. But what makes this shot work for me is one, the quality of the light. This looks like it was shot on a day that had very diffuse, maybe a partially cloudy day. So you don't have any of those harsh shadows that normally would result in these strong shadows beneath the brow of this big hat that's covering this girl's head. And the light is really soft, it's even, it wraps around her and in a really wonderful way. The second thing is, of course, the expression on the girl's face. I mean, there's an intensity here and a focus that really captures my attention. The other thing is the gesture, the way her hands are on the reins of the horse. I love the placement of both of her hands there. And there's also this great contrast. The contrast of this black hat against the green and the white elements in the background. The way the hat frames her face. Even though this shirt is very busy with sort of this paisley look, I think it really complements and helps to frame her face, especially the blonde hair that's coming down from her head. All of those elements, I think, really help to make the shot. And you notice that I'm talking about things that I often talk about in other photographs that we've included in these videos that have been made with wider focal lengths. I'm talking about the quality of the light. I'm talking about contrast. I'm talking about gesture. All of those things that come into play when you're using a wide focal length have to come into play when you're using a telephoto lens. That's why I think it's important that if you're choosing to use a telephoto focal length, you have to get past the fact that the reason you're primarily using it is because you don't want to call attention to yourself. If you're focused on that primarily, then you're not going to be paying attention to all these other things, because you're going to be filled with a certain level of anxiety and fear, and that's going to be the focus of your attention. Whether that someone is going to look directly into the lens and all of a sudden you're going to have this moment where you go, oh crap, this person's looking at me, they see that I'm taking a photograph, or that a conflict that's going to result. That really hampers your ability to be fully creative in the moment. If you choose to use a telephoto focal length, then just own it. And then from then on, pay attention to all these other things that we talk about that really make for a really good photograph. Okay, here we have a shot by Husgen. This was made at 640th of a second at 6.3 at ISO 6400 at a focal length of 200 millimeters. Now, with this shot, it's not immediately obvious that he was using a telephoto focal length. There is an element in the foreground here on the right that's largely in shadow, and I'm not sure exactly how close that was to the camera. It seems to be between the subject and the pair that's about to kiss in this frame. So we don't have the obvious telltale signs of the compression. And for me, that's not really sort of a big issue here. But again, the choice of the telephoto focal length, obviously in this case, was probably advantageous because you don't want to ruin this moment. You don't want to go in there with a 24 millimeter lens, get up about 2 feet away from them and start snapping away. That obviously would distract these two people and call attention to you and ruin the photograph. But again, what makes this shot interesting? We obviously have the gesture of these two people about to kiss. But the thing that really grabs my attention largely is the quality of the light. The light that seems to be coming from some artificial light source just above the couple casts this light on them that really brings out the color of their respective reddish hair. And it also helps to create this nice light on the woman's face. It helps to define her face, even though the face of the man she's kissing is silhouetted. But that quality of light is also really important here because it helps to define the shape of their faces and their bodies against that light-colored wall in the background. That light is really key here because if the light was in between the camera and the subjects, it might better illuminate the people there, but it may have resulted in them sort of bleeding into the background where their shapes are not as cleanly defined as they are here. And look at how important that resulting contrast is here. Their shapes of their bodies, the collar of his jacket, all of that stuff is really important for the effectiveness of this photograph. This is really challenging light. It's obviously a low light situation. You're having to shoot at a relatively high ISO in order to get a fast enough shutter speed to capture a fairly sharp photograph. But he pulls it off. And the telephoto here was important just because of the reason that most people want to use a telephoto lens is because they don't want to call attention to themselves or ruin the moment. But that alone doesn't make it a good shot. It's all those things about light, contrast, gesture that really make the image work really, really well. I see this red element here on the left-hand side of the frame, and I'm not sure whether that bothers me or not. I think it works because it complements the reddish color of the hair. I imagine this photo is a black and white, and I think that having that element there on the far left-hand side is not problematic for me. It might be for others, but it's not an issue for me. All right, here we have a shot by Dave Bennett. This was made with an Olympus EPL7 at 1,250th of a second at 5.6, ISO 400 at a focal length of 150 millimeters. Now, remember that issue of compression that I talked about with the first shot? That's really at play here. That compression results in that security gate behind the bald fellow and the figures in the foreground appearing much closer to this person than they actually probably were in the scene. So that compression sort of, brings those things into proximity. And it creates a real contrast between soft and sharp that works really, really well. So what makes this shot work? Well, one of the key things about this shot is the two foreground elements, because Dave here frames our subject between these two heads. And it's like looking through a window to see what's behind the window. And this is a great framing device that's used a lot in street photography, and it works really beautifully here. Now, that shallow depth of field helps to focus on his eyes, his intent look as he's looking directly at the camera. I love the fact that this guy is looking intently into the lens. It makes for a really great shot for the reasons that I just indicated. I don't know if this shot would work as well if he were looking off to the left or to the right, or if he was on his phone or something along those lines. There's something about the intense look in his eyes that makes this shot really, really remarkable. I love how clean the background is. You get this nice repeating pattern of these rectangles that serve as the background. I like the contrast between the dark gray of his hoodie against the lighter gray of the security gate. The quality of the light here is also sort of a diffused light, a soft quality of light. We are dealing with a little stronger shadows than we were with the first image here, but it's nothing that's problematic here. So this and all the other images that we just talked about just stress the importance of paying attention. I mean, I repeat this week after week after week, and I hope it's sinking in for a lot of you. I have to remind myself to do it myself, every once in a while, because I get caught up in the wrong things. But it's all about paying attention to the visual cues that make for a successful photograph. The moment I'm too preoccupied with my camera or my lens choice, or whether or not someone's going to, not like the fact that I'm making a photograph, that means my attention is on the wrong thing, and that I'm too distracted, and that I'm going to be depending more on luck than skill to make a really good photograph. Hope you found that helpful, and if you want to learn more about the essentials of photography, I hope you'll take advantage of the Candid Frame Photo Essentials ebook and video. It's a course that I came up with a little while ago that offers a 59-page full-color ebook and 3 hours of streaming video, where I talk about the principles of photography. And I do that using a lot of images that I've taken. So you'll hear me talking about these principles, about ISO, focal length, choice, understanding your camera, all within the context of images. One of the things that's often missing when people explain the technical side of photography is the context of when and why you would want to use a particular feature. And this is my answer to that. And I think that it is going to be a really valuable resource for those of you who really want to get to the next level in your photography. And it's normally $69, but you can get it for just $29 by using the promo code TCF17. And if you want to submit images to the Candid Frame Flickr Pool, all you need to do is go to your computer and ask to be added. Just go to Flickr, do a search on the Candid Frame, ask to be added, and I usually get to it once a week, and I'll be more than glad to add you. And then you can start submitting images to our group here. We have over 3,000 members so far, which is fantastic. And you'll get to see some amazing work that's being produced by listeners of the Candid Frame. Avoid trying to do this on your phone or your tablet. For whatever reason, you'll get a notification that this is a private group and you can't join it. I don't know why that's an issue, but you have no problem at all being added to the group if you just go via your computer. And the Candid Frame is actually a podcast which features conversations with some of the world's best photographers. I've been doing this for almost 11 years, and we have over 386 interviews in our archive with some amazing, talented photographers from all over the world. Our most recent interview was with Doug Menway, and he is an amazing photojournalist and documentary photographer who's probably best known for documenting the early days of Silicon Valley, including the rise and fall and the rise again of Steve Jobs and Apple, the people behind the creation of Adobe Photoshop, and all those people who have eventually changed our lives over the last 25 years. It's an amazing story with some amazing images, and it really is an inspiration. So check it out. You can stream the episodes here on YouTube, but the best way to get it is by just downloading the Candid Frame app. And there'll be a link on the website here for Windows, Android, and for Apple iOS. And there you'll have complete access to the entire archive of interviews. So check it out. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.